In the winter of 1641, Protestant settlers in Ireland were savagely attacked by their Catholic neighbours. At Portadown in Ulster, the Protestants were stripped bare and thrown into the freezing waters of the River Bann. Those who tried to swim to the riverbank were bludgeoned or shot. Almost 100 Protestant men, women and children were condemned to an icy grave. Civil war had now hit Ireland.
The bloodbath of 1641, part of which took place here at the River Bann, blew apart the uneasy peace between King and Parliament, between England, Scotland and Ireland, and between Catholic and Protestant. The Portadown Massacre is still part of the memory of Ulster. The troubles of the 1640s are part of today's troubles. The events here started a decade of bloody conflict which pitted English, Irish and Scottish against each other and against themselves.
By 1641, relations between Scotland and England had settled down after King Charles I had narrowly avoided a full-scale war with the Scots. Charles's attempt to impose his religious agenda had alienated most of the Scottish people, as well as the Puritan faction in Parliament. They feared their Protestant religion was being undermined by Charles and had forced the king to back down. But in Ireland, the Protestant faith was facing a far more deadly threat. The roots of the Irish Rebellion go back to the early 1600s, when English and Scottish Protestants were settled in Ireland by Charles's father, James I, to help exert royal authority over Catholic Ireland.
Behind me are the Loyal Orange Lodges, assembled here to commemorate their past. Among these Orange men are probably direct descendants of the Protestant settlers introduced by James I. And the religious fault lines, which began then between Protestant and Catholic, continue to this day.
During the 17th century, the Protestant settlers occupied some of the most fertile areas of Ireland. In a policy of forced migration, they pushed the native population onto barren land. As the Catholic Irish faced extreme poverty, they began to feel as if their very existence was under threat.
By the late 1630s, relations between the Protestant settlers and the Irish Catholics were at breaking point. The problem was their king, Charles I, was king not only of Ireland, but also of Scotland and England. And the more Charles seemed to placate Protestants in Scotland and England, the more the Catholics in Ireland became fearful. In the end, they saw no way out but rebellion.
Across Ireland, over 12,000 Protestants were killed. As other settlers began to fight back, Ireland became the Balkans of the 17th century. The sectarian divisions which began then continue to this day. Every year, razor wire and barricades are erected at Drumcree Church just outside Portadown to prevent the ritual march of Protestant Orangemen through Catholic neighbourhoods.
You don't have to be here long to feel the sheer weight of the past. And you don't need to be here at all to read the papers or see the TV images to understand that the Irish Rebellion began a series of divisions which still scar communities like this one.
In a desperate bid to escape the violence, thousands of terrified Protestant settlers boarded ships bound for the English mainland. As they crossed the Irish Sea, they carried with them terrible stories of bloodshed. At a time of information confusion, with no UN observers or 24-hour media, they escalated with each account.
Cheap tracts and woodcuts gloried in every bloody tale of torture and mutilation. Truly gruesome stories of skin stripped from bones and babies ripped from wombs fed the anti-Catholic hysteria. Such was the frenzy that one educated MP put the number of dead at over 200,000.
These vastly exaggerated figures of Protestant dead sparked fears of a Catholic uprising across England. In London, the Irish rebellion unleashed a blind panic that only intensified the antagonism between King and Parliament. Charles demanded Parliament give him the money for an army to crush the Irish Catholics. But the King had made many enemies in Westminster, and none more so than John Pym, the leader of the Puritans in the House of Commons.
Say to him and try and change his mind. He can like it.
Pym blocked all moves to help the King. He argued that if Charles got hold of an army, he might well use it to crush dissent in Parliament. Instead, Pym urged the House of Commons to issue a grand remonstrance attacking the King. This damning document listed all of Parliament's religious and political grievances. It was a momentous assault on the royal prerogative at a time of crisis, and only hardened Charles's contempt for the parliamentarians. But the Puritans in Parliament had their sights on a Catholic threat much closer to home than Ireland. As a committed Roman Catholic, Charles's wife, Queen Henrietta Maria, was despised by the Puritans. Pym feared she had a dangerous influence over the King. He even accused her of supporting the Catholic rebellion in Ireland. When rumours began to circulate that the House of Commons might impeach the Queen, she demanded Charles take action.
On January the 4th, 1642, Charles marched out of Whitehall Palace with 400 armed guards to storm Westminster.
Charles burst into the chamber and demanded of the Speaker of the House, "Is Mr. Pym here?" The Speaker refused to answer and instead replied, "I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak, except as this House is pleased to direct me." "No matter," said Charles as he scanned the empty chamber. "I see all the birds have flown."
Pym had learnt of Charles's approach. Together with his accomplices, he slipped out of the House of Commons, along the corridors of Westminster, and onto a barge waiting to take them downriver. Charles pursued Pym and the fugitives deep into the city, but the King was confronted by an angry mob. The people of London were turning against him. Charles was terrified. In a panic, he gathered together his wife and children and fled the capital. When they arrived at Hampton Court in the dead of night, nothing had been prepared. The royal family slept together in an unmade bed. The King's botched attempt to arrest Pym was calamitous. To many MPs, Charles had behaved like a tyrant. There now seemed an insurmountable gulf between King and Parliament. Charles would never again see London as a free man. Back in Ireland, the Catholic rebellion had now escalated into a full-blown civil war. Fighting intensified as thousands of Scottish and English Protestants arrived to defend the embattled settler communities. The Catholics had formed a confederation, and after a string of victories were now demanding self-government and full religious toleration. The leader of the Irish Confederates, Owen Roe O'Neill, was an inspirational figure who had spent the previous 20 years fighting for Catholicism on the European mainland. Using hit-and-run guerrilla tactics, O'Neill subjected the Protestant communities to a brutal campaign of burning, looting and killing.
With the king gone and news of Catholic victories in Ireland, London descended into anarchy. Barricades and chains went up across the streets, while rumours of plots and invasions circulated wildly. In this highly charged atmosphere, Parliament gained the support of the London apprentices. They milled round Westminster, attacking anyone suspected of Catholic or Royalist sympathies. It was the hair of the apprentices, or rather lack of it, that earned the parliamentarians their nickname. Because of their short-haired, bullet-headed appearance, they became ridiculed as Roundheads. They were the skinheads of the Civil War.
What we say when we admit to the Lord that we are sinners and we need his forgiveness. The time has
The Roundheads were fired up by lurid readings from the Book of Revelations and prophecies of damnation.
love thy neighbour, but it also says
They genuinely believed Charles was the victim of a Catholic plot which had turned him against his own people.
and turn unto him.
So the order given to the Roundhead generals was not to kill the king, but to rescue him from his evil popish advisors.
As the parliamentarians became known as Roundheads, so the royalists gained the title of Cavaliers. This had nothing to do with the length of their hair, but was another term of abuse, alluding to the cavaliero or Spanish trooper. The Spanish army was Europe's most militant fighter for Catholicism, so cavalier meant oppressor of the Protestant cause. Most cavaliers were not passionate defenders of Charles, but they were willing to fight to defend the Church of England from Puritan extremists.
Look to your arms! With haste, gentlemen!
The two sides were now involved in a furious race to raise and equip an army. Fighting men across England were ordered by both sides to rally to their cause. King and Parliament issued competing demands for loyalty, and the country grudgingly divided into Roundheads and Cavaliers. Every man was forced to choose a side in a war few wanted and many feared.
The terrible brutality of civil wars lies in their ability to set communities, even families, against each other. As the modern conflict in the Balkans has shown, there is little more destructive than a nation fighting itself. For huge numbers, the very idea of rebelling against the monarch was just too awful to contemplate. Since their earliest days at church, the English had been taught the homily of obedience. The authority of kings, it said, our ordinance is not of man, but of God. We may not resist, nor in any ways hurt, an anointed king.
Negotiations between the two sides collapsed. On August 22nd, 1642, King Charles I made an unprecedented move. For the first and last time in English history, a king officially declared war against his own parliament. On a windswept hill outside the strategically vital town of Nottingham, the king's royal standard was unfurled in front of a small group of loyal followers. Parliament and all who supported the Roundheads were denounced as traitors.
England was becoming slowly divided up between royalist and parliamentarian sympathisers. Generally, the West and the North were for the king, while the South and the East were for Parliament. The areas with stronger support for Parliament were those with a history of Puritanism, such as Essex and East Anglia, as well as the commercial centres of London and Bristol. Elsewhere, the king enjoyed broad support, especially in more rural, traditional communities, where Puritanism hadn't gained such a foothold.
Charles set out to reclaim his capital in October 1642. However, the Roundheads were desperate to prevent the Cavaliers from reaching London. It was only a matter of time before the two armies came face to face. The pin-up boy of the Cavalier army was Charles's nephew, Prince Rupert of the Rhine. At 23, he was a charismatic and highly skilled cavalry commander. He had fought with great distinction in the religious wars which were raging on the continent. Rupert saw Parliament's rebellion as a personal affront to his uncle and his family. He was determined to crush it. The Roundhead army was commanded by the less glamorous Earl of Essex. He too was a veteran of the wars on the continent, but as a Puritan and critic of Charles, Essex had chosen to back Parliament.
The two armies were to meet here for the first encounter. The first time Englishmen had fought Englishmen since the Wars of the Roses 200 years earlier. On the road from Kinnerton to Banbury, in the heart of England, they met at this dramatic escarpment known as Edgehill. Diplomacy finally collapsed as King and Parliament went to war over their competing visions of church and state. When Essex arrived at Edgehill, he discovered the Cavaliers had taken the high ground. He looked up to see an army of 13,000 men, a sea of 15-foot pike, thousands of armed cavalry with swords and pistols, cannons positioned and lines of musketeers. At the top of the escarpment, Charles, dressed in a black velvet cloak, rode along the lines offering encouragement. Your king is your cause, your quarrel and your captain.
At 3 p.m, Essex gave the order for his artillery to open fire. The Cavaliers immediately responded. As the battle began, one of the Cavalier commanders offered up a prayer.
O Lord, thou knowest how busy I must be this day. If I forget thee, do not thou forget me. And then Rupert charged. His cavalry rode tight together, hoping to smash the Roundhead forces. With the first impact of their charge, they came in hard on the angle, firing at the stunned Roundhead infantry, who turned and fled. With that, the Royalist infantry commander Astley shouted, "March on, boys!" And the Cavalier foot, armed with their vast pikes, plunged them into the Roundheads. But Rupert's enthusiasm got the better of him. His cavalry pursued fleeing soldiers and, instead of returning to the battle, plundered baggage trains deep behind enemy lines. The Cavalier foot soldiers were left without cover.
The Earl of Essex had cleverly kept 2 regiments of cavalry in reserve. With Rupert gone, they ploughed into the Cavaliers, and for the first time, the Roundheads sensed they might win. But the Cavalier artillery fought back with a hail of shot and halted the Roundheads' advance. Now completely exhausted, neither army was capable of making a breakthrough, and as darkness descended, they both retired. As morning broke, the human cost of the Civil War was all too apparent. Women scoured the battlefield, hoping to find a lost husband or son. Others stripped the dead of any valuable items. In wartime, even a pair of boots made a fine prize. Hundreds of men on both sides had been killed, over 1,500 in total. Neither side was keen to renew the action.
The Battle of Edgehill was an unsatisfactory draw, but crucially, Essex had failed to stop the king, and the way was now open for Charles to march on London. Taking Banbury, Oxford and Reading, Charles and Rupert soon had an anxious parliament in their sights. But when they reached the modern-day London suburb of Turnham Green, the tired royalists were faced by 20,000 armed militia who had come out to defend the city. Charles and Rupert thought better of taking on such a force and retreated back to Oxford.
As winter drew in, both sides halted the conflict. Harsh weather conditions made it impossible to move their vast armies around the country.
Charles chose Oxford as his headquarters, with its tradition of conservatism and support for Archbishop Laud's religious reforms. The king felt at home here. Oxford's magnificent colleges provided exactly the right setting for the king and his entourage to set up Charles's wartime court. Anyone who was anyone fled Puritan London and headed down to Oxford. Charles lived at Christ Church College. New College became the principal armoury, and Rupert based himself at Magdalen. University life was turned upside down as livestock were penned in quads and college silver was melted down to fund the high living. Charles was having a ball and rewarded his followers with a shower of university honours. He awarded 18 doctors and 48 bachelors of divinity, 5 doctors and 8 bachelors of physics, 34 doctors and 14 bachelors of civil law, 76 MAs and 12 BAs, until, that is, the university asked him to stop.
The king reserved his generous mood for his supporters. When the Roundheads offered terms for a settlement, he treated them with contempt.
There are 3 things, Charles told them, I will not part with. The church, my crown, and my friends, and you will have much ado to get them from me. No one had expected a stalemate. The battle at Edgehill was meant to resolve the dispute between king and parliament. While both sides remained confident of victory, neither seemed interested in a settlement. For the country at large, this was the worst of all worlds.
While the Cavaliers lived it up in Oxford, the Roundheads started destroying all physical signs of Charles's reforms to the Church of England. Puritan preachers denounced the king for corrupting the Protestant faith with popish affectations.
Stained glass windows, fonts, rails, statues, even communion tables were damaged by billeted soldiers and also deliberately destroyed as symbols of popery and idolatry. Worcester was hit the worst. It was described by one Roundhead soldier as so vile, papistical and abominable that it resembles Sodom and is the very emblem of Gomorrah.
Early in 1643, the Civil War in England kicked off again. The Royalist Cavaliers swept through the west of England, and by July they had captured the Roundhead stronghold of Bristol.
Despite Charles's great successes in the west, there was still no decisive breakthrough. Both sides now looked for outside reinforcements.
The Civil War was never an entirely English affair. Ireland and Scotland were always part of the conflict. And in 1643, Charles turned to the Catholics of Ireland for help. He cut a peace deal with Owen Roe O'Neill, leader of the Confederate rebels.
In return for Charles agreeing to repeal anti-Catholic laws and to grant the Irish greater political independence, the Confederates, they'd not only agreed to a ceasefire, but they'd also helped the Cavaliers with troops and arms.
The ceasefire in Ireland also freed thousands of English troops who returned home to fight for the king. But there was a price.
By agreeing to negotiate with the Confederates, Charles was seen to have cut a deal with the devil. It was a betrayal of the entire English nation. He had sold his soul to the very people who slaughtered innocent Protestants at Portadown during the 1641 rebellion, all to help crush his own people.
With reinforcements from Ireland, the Cavaliers made steady gains in the northwest of England. There was now a real danger of the Roundheads losing the war. So Parliament's leader, John Pym, though racked with cancer, started secret negotiations with Scottish Protestants. On the 25th of September, 1643, they united together in a Protestant alliance against the king. In one diplomatic masterstroke, Pym had given Parliament the edge. Only 3 months later, Pym was dead. With the alliance now in place, 20,000 Scots crossed the border. Together with the Roundheads, they overwhelmed the Cavaliers in the northeast and surged forward to York. In a desperate rearguard action, the king's troops razed every building to the ground and scorched the earth surrounding York before retreating behind the city walls.
As the Roundheads began mining York's city walls, Charles sent Rupert an urgent message. "If York be lost, I shall esteem my crown a little less. Immediately march with all your force to the relief of York." Charles specifically didn't want another major military engagement with the Roundheads. He just wanted to secure this strategically vital city of York. But Rupert was impetuous and hungry for battle. He was also keen to meet someone, a brilliant Roundhead cavalry commander who had beaten the Royalists time and again. As Rupert set up camp for the night outside the city walls, he asked, "Is Cromwell here?"
They were to meet at the largest battle of the Civil War. For a free study guide about the Civil War and listings of other Open University programmes, you can visit our website at open2.net/Civil War or call us on 0870 900 0312.